Hi, my name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it. And I'm going to say something on TV that I didn't think I would say, at least not in the near past or future. And that is that I am about to be not just Fed Pride, but retired Fed Pride. So I'm actually leaving federal service on the 3rd of January and happy to do so. I'm a proud person who belongs to the old retirement system, so I'm going to live off of that and be quite happy. So not yet, I can still say my name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. It's called Fed Pride because I'm a federal worker, and I'm going to have to say the name of the show is Fed Pride, and I am a retired federal worker. So that situation is going to happen, and now I'm not going to cancel my retirement for any amount of money now that I've said it on TV. How often does somebody get to do and say that? So kudos to Access Tucson for being open enough to let me do this show, and I'm going to continue to do this show even after I am no longer, at least on the books, a federal worker. And then I'll have to say federal retiree. So I'm really proud of that, and I'm glad about that. Couldn't happen at a better time because there's a budget crisis looming. Again, I do this show on Friday. This is live to tape. If I fall off the chair, you are going to see me fall off the chair. So I say something silly, as I often do. You're going to see me say something silly because this is live to tape. What I do is what you see. No editing, no nothing. So you're probably going to see this at 1 o'clock on Sunday on, I believe, Channel 72, or at 7 o'clock on Tuesday. And by the time that's on, everything I talk about is going to be obsolete, out of date. Who needs it? Who cares? But that is just the charm of this particular show. And because it's Thanksgiving next week, I'm probably not going to be here to do the show at all. So you'll probably see a new show, or see another Randall Repeats, and a new show the week after that. Now, if I can grab it, which I can't seem to do today, it seems to be frozen over here. I'm going to give a spin to the Earth, and the Earth is still there. Subjects I'm going to talk about are a couple different things. First is, and this is just straight off the top of my head, I don't have an article in front of me, I haven't researched it or anything, but listening to the radio, there has been a vote in the House, and that I believe was either yesterday or the day before yesterday, to vote for about $50 billion for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, with a proviso to demand an immediate beginning of pulling out troops, with all troops being out of Iraq by the end of 2008. And of course, Iraq is right there. What does that mean? Well, I think it's kind of in my opinion, a dumb political move on the part of the Democrats, because whether they like it or not, and I like it a lot, the surge is helping at least stabilize the military situation. I've said a long time, for years, that Rumsfeld was completely incompetent. He needed to be fired. And when he was fired, not only was he fired, but Sanchez, the entire military chain, top to bottom, was gotten rid of out of Iraq. And the military leader in Iraq, or over the Iraqi theater, is a fellow named General Petraeus, who wrote a book about counterinsurgency. And basically his book was, don't build giant bases, build little bitty bases, actually secure the territory. You're going to need boots on the ground. You're going to need more soldiers. Completely the opposite of Rumsfeld's transformation strategy. His transformation strategy was, we don't need hardly any soldiers to take over anything. All we need are high-tech weapons, satellites, and so on and so forth. When we went into Afghanistan, which was basically the whiff of gunshot system. The Taliban had strained relationships with most of the sheikhs and the people in Afghanistan, so that Karzai, first of all, the Northern Alliance was against him, and then later Karzai was against him. Here's Afghanistan over here, the Northern Alliance was over there. And the real basis of Taliban rule, Kandahar, Jalalabad, were over here. So basically what happened was, they say that Karzai, the person who's now the president of Afghanistan, that his cell phone was the most potent weapon of the entire war. So basically we sent special forces spotted the enemy, or else friendly sheikhs spotted the enemy, and B-52s and so on and so forth from bases in the stands over here came in, battered the heck out of the Taliban, and their alliance internally collapsed. Basically, the various factions of the Afghan society came to our side. So basically, with very, very small numbers of troops, some high tech, lots of good communications, and air power, we were able, with allies, to be able to crack the opposition and take over Afghanistan. And in that particular war, we had the support of NATO and so on and so forth. Iraq, of course, completely different story over here. 25 million people, ruled by the Ba'athist Party, ruled by a savage dictator who had killed many, many people, 200 to 300,000. Not so much a genocide as a politicide, killing his enemies and killing his ideological enemies, but it just happened that most of his ideological enemies were either Kurds or Shiites. So it kind of became an ethnic genocide in a way. But not total, but still horrible. 200 to 300,000 people over a period of about 20 years. But on the other hand, he also tried to kill the president's father. When the president came in there after 9/11, he was ready to roll against Iraq. It took a couple years before that got started. And once Afghanistan calmed down, he basically started operations in Iraq. The transformation philosophy that with few troops on the ground, but with very, very high-tech weapons, with lots of armor, lots of air power, with shock and awe, they did manage to crack Saddam Hussein's regime within about 4 to 6 weeks. However, that did not end the war, and anybody who had half a brain would have told him that, and I certainly was saying it at the time. Basically, what they needed was a armored vehicle on every single corner. They needed to secure all of Saddam's bases, and they needed to secure all of Saddam's weapons. They needed to secure his money in order to prevent a guerrilla war. Rumsfeld, in his wisdom and glory, the minute that statue came down, did just the opposite. In fact, there were actual American troops in one of the bases that had the very, very high caliber explosives that are used, the regular explosives, not nuclear explosives, but they're used in nuclear bombs to push the nuclear material together that causes the nuclear explosion. Crytons, I think they're called. Basically, our troops were told, even though they were in that base, to stand down and not to secure the materials in the bunkers while trucks came by and emptied out the bunkers. And of course that was the basis for the insurgency, just having a virtually infinite supply of explosives for IEDs and so on and so forth. And then of course the main opponent in Iraq was Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The same radicals that we had defeated in Afghanistan. They have an international network of foreign fighters that basically can be smuggled into any country in the Middle East, or anywhere else for that matter, because they smuggled 19 obviously into the United States to do 9/11. And hundreds and hundreds of these foreign fighters came in who were willing and who did suicide bomb and kill themselves while killing others. And they became, they gradually took over the anti-American insurgency, and the casualties for Americans went up to well over 100 a month. In some cases 150 and almost 200. So this constant, very, very high casualty rate, lower than Vietnam, but high nevertheless, which was compounded by Rumsfeld's idiotic policies, and I'm going to say it, idiotic policies of having them run around in unarmored Humvees, pulling out armored vehicles, and basically letting them be virtually unprotected, except in very, very large bases built by contractors, some of whom had connections and interest with people in the administration themselves. Everything set to be a complete disaster. Unfortunately, even after the Bush was barely reelected, even though he had interpreted his reelection as a mandate, in fact, he did not get one electoral vote more than he got before. And his popular vote was had a margin of about 1 million, 1.5 million, maybe 1%. 2% over the opponent, but 1% over 50%. So very, very narrow election. Actually, I believe they had actually lost seats in the House and Senate in 2004, and yet they didn't fire Rumsfeld. And Rumsfeld clearly was screwing this thing up. It took another election in 2006 for basically the American people to reject a absolute majority of the House and the Senate to bring both houses of Congress from total Republican dominance to Democratic dominance, for them to realize that Rumsfeld and his stupidity and his idiotic tactics were hurting the Republican Party. Rumsfeld was summarily fired. Petraeus took over, and Petraeus immediately advocated a surge, which is an increase in troops. But what he did do, because there were constant bombings and constant attacks, especially in Baghdad, that was completely turning any local support that the West may have had before away from the Shiites, from the Sunnis, even from the Kurds. Constant attacks, attacks on mosques, attacks on people trying to buy things at outdoor markets, just constant bloody attacks. And then Al-Qaeda in Iraq went way too far. They started attacking the other Sunnis in Anbar province. Anbar province is this deserty western part, but it also has the Euphrates Valley, and Fallujah, Ramadi, these cities that Tel Afar, that Al-Qaeda in Iraq had dominated, were in there too. So they started actually going after, as if they controlled the government, as if they had controlled, had absolute totalitarian control. They started a purge of the Sunnis and started killing the Sunni sheikhs. All this did because, fortunately, Rumsfeld was out, so was Sanchez, so was Abu Zaid. All of our military chain that screwed this thing up were out, and Petraeus was in. There was a lieutenant colonel in Ramadi, the capital of Anbar province, who made a deal with a specific sheikh. They created a victory council, and the Victory Council started spreading. The Americans took that strategy to other areas and even to Baghdad. And eventually, the Al-Qaeda in Iraq is virtually defeated in Anbar province, with a subsequent reduction in IEDs and American casualties. In Baghdad, Petraeus offered a new strategy that had never been tried before. And it's something that is always suggested when you occupy a country. And that is to go out there in every neighborhood and create a presence in every single neighborhood to give the people a feeling of security. And small bases were put in various neighborhoods throughout Baghdad, and took a few months. There was some tension with the Shiites, who were having their own civil war at the time, between al-Sadr's Mehdi army and the Badr Brigade, who are loyal to the Ayatollah who's in charge of the Shiites. Both sides, oddly enough, are pro-Iran, anti-American ultimately. But both sides, the al-Sadr people started opposing the Americans, and it got so bad that even al-Sadr told his own people, back off and stand down, because the people in Baghdad were sick and tired of the violence. Baghdad's not free of violence, but it's greatly improved. So what do we have? We have lower American casualties. We'll see whether that stands. I suspect it will. And we have a situation where our number one enemy, the enemy that we should have been fighting, and the only enemy that we should have been fighting, which is Al-Qaeda, the people that blew up the Trade Center and killed 3,000 Americans, and the Pentagon, largely, although not totally, defeated. There's still an area north of Baghdad with a mixed province called Diyala province, where there is still some fighting, and where we're still going after and making alliances, and they're still killing sheikhs that are for us. So at this point, in my opinion, then saying, oh no, you know, we're going to set a date and leave, we're getting out of here, is a dumb thing. We've committed ourselves, and these people, these sheikhs, have committed themselves to our presence until they can defeat our enemy and their enemy. Al-Qaeda went way too far. They made themselves very, very unpopular, and it's telling for now. So I have to say it, and even though I was very skeptical and was against our strategy when Rumsfeld was in there, give it a chance. I know that these back-to-back rotations over there are very, very painful. I have friends over there who are at risk, who work in the agencies that I have worked for, people that I know personally, and I hate to see them over there in harm's way, but let's give the surge and this new strategy, the strategy that had we taken in 2003, we would be pulling troops out now. And I believe that there is still a plan to at least reverse the surge and bring the total down to 140,000. 140,000 is the top. Before the surge, I think 147 or something like that, but pretty close to the top of the number of soldiers we've ever had. So that we can actually transition these little bases throughout Baghdad and these bigger bases throughout the country to other Iraqi units. And now there are a lot of Iraqis. The Iraqis, basically the deal was that if you defeat our enemy and stabilize your country, we'll get out of here. We have no reason to be here, and we don't want to be here. And that is the only way to get us out. And if we work this otherwise, we're going to have a problem. So anyway, what is that on a political thing? I'm going to be very, very quickly about that. Congress put this provision in that we'll vote the money for the war, but we got to be out of here by the end of 2008. And basically the Senate, the Republicans in the Senate blocked it. So now there's no funding at all, at least for this round. And they're threatening, at least the Secretary of Defense is threatening a furlough. I was personally in a furlough back during the Clinton era. I got paid, but I have to admit I had a couple days over there because, and also a hurt pride, because I found out once and for all, and I'm sure that's leading 10 years later, 13 years later, to my eventual retirement, that I was not essential. And I'm sure that will be true again. Not essential, you're going, unpaid leave, you're furloughed, forget about it. So until they fund it, there might very well be furloughs. The basic threat on Friday, November 16th, is 100,000 civilian employees out the door, unessential, probably more. And I suspect that probably by the time you see it, and if you don't see it this week, that by the time you see it during Thanksgiving week, this will be resolved one way or the other. Somebody will pass something. But right now, it looks like a furlough might happen. A couple other issues that I'm going to talk about, and one that I'm really pleased about, and that is the King of Spain went to a gathering of, I have to admit, left-wing leaders in Chile. It was dominated and called by Hugo Chavez, my bête noire, the person I like the least in all of Latin America. And Hugo Chavez immediately insulted the king by saying that the previous Spanish prime minister, of a democratically elected prime minister who was democratically unelected and left, was a fascist. And the king turned around and he said to Hugo Chavez, and I'm going to find the phrase, okay, I can't find it in Spanish, but basically it means shut up. And great. After taking over the media and declaring himself president for life, I definitely agree with that, and I'm real pleased to see that. And all the things that have happened in Venezuela, riots in the universities, the general that basically saved his regime and probably his life during the coup in 2002, coming out and saying that he is trying to be a dictator and coming out against him for the current revision of the Constitution, which is probably going to win. It's great to hear somebody have the guts to come up and stand up to Hugo Chavez. And I've already talked about the fact that an American oil company, Citgo, is actually owned by the government of Venezuela. And last week I proved it with a full-page ad in the New York Times that said the Embassy of Venezuela invites you to a certain concert. At the bottom it said Citgo, a division of PDVSA, which is the Venezuelan oil company owned by the government. So much for Chavez. There's also a report here that Chavez might have killed some Guyanese, murdered some Guyanese miners at the border, blew them up, who were mining at a river on the border. And both Guyana and Venezuela have sent some troops over to their border. I'm going to show you where that is. Here's Venezuela over here. This is Guyana, so this river that they're talking about, probably right over there. Another thing, Second Cold War, and of course Hugo Chavez's greatest ally and military supplier is Vladimir Putin of Russia, and I've been saying that he's trying to start a new Cold War. We're talking about coming in and putting some anti-missile missiles in Poland with a radar here in Czech. Basically, Putin's general, and that is General Vladimir Zaritsky, chief of artillery and rocket forces of Russia, is now saying that Russia may put Iskander missiles right over here in this little country. That country is called Belarus. It's ruled by a dictator named Lukashenko, who is anathema to the West. Even the Europeans won't trade with him and boycott him. But he's willing to take missiles from Russia, and these are short-range missiles, no more than 310 miles, but in the short run only 190 miles, because mid-range missiles were destroyed by treaty between Gorbachev and Reagan back in 1987. And Putin is even talking about violating that. But these are strong enough to actually hit any anti-missile bases that we might want to put into Poland. And of course, Putin is very resentful that the Soviets have lost their empire. He's an old KGB agent. And he's double resentful because both Czech and Poland were part of the Warsaw Pact and supporters of the USSR, the Soviet Union, that was the previous Russian-dominated communist empire. My name is Reed Silverne. Name of the show is Fed Pride. Reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it.